Hello, welcome. Welcome. We'll just give it a minute or so. Hello, welcome everyone. Thank you for joining. All right, we're going to go ahead and get started. Still have quite a few people trickling in here. Thank you for joining. My name's Neil. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Beckley Retreats and a student at the Harvard Chan School of Public Health. And today we're going to do a session on burnout. It'll be about 30 minutes. And from this session, you'll leave with an understanding of what burnout is and how to recognize it, and hopefully some idea of how to maybe start getting at some of the symptoms. Just want to be clear, we're not providing any medical advice. The programs that we do are for personal and professional development. Make sure you check with your doctor if you make any changes to your medical care. And if you care to, no pressure, but go ahead and put in the chat why you're coming today, what you're hoping to get out of this session, and we'll try and make sure that we have some time at the end for questions. Next slide. So I was a former Army Special Operations officer. I went to Iraq once, Afghanistan twice, and then I was at McKinsey & Company for a while, and then private equity restructuring. So whether I like it or not, I think I'm a burnout expert from personal experience. And I'm joined by two of my teammates and friends, Dr. Grace Bless-Hopley, who we've been doing quite a bit of research with, and one of our lovely facilitators, Mandy Bent. And I'll pass it to Grace to give a short intro of herself.
Sure. Thank you, Neil. Yeah, lovely to meet you all. My name's Dr. Grace Bless-Hopley. I'm a neuroscientist. I studied at King's College London in neuropsychopharmacology. And now, as it says here, I'm the founder of Hysterica. It looks at women's psychedelic use, and the director of Heroic Hearts, that is a veterans program who've worked quite closely with Beckley in the past. And we facilitate veterans through psychedelic experiences. And it's a pleasure to be here to talking with you all today.
Thanks, Grace. Hi, everyone. I'm Mandy. I'm a Beckley Retreats facilitator and an integration co-lead at the Jamaica Retreat Center. I also have personal experience with burnout and was able to make significant life changes with the support of psychedelics. So I'm really happy to be here with you today.
So we're going to do a short movement exercise because we need to live what we're preaching, I would say. We're going to talk a bit about the science of burnout. Grace will take us through that. We'll talk about integrative health, psychedelics, and how they could potentially be helpful for burnout. We'll talk briefly about Beckley Retreats approach, and then we'll have some time at the end for Q&A. And I'll pass it to Mandy. And if you care to, we'd like you to get up and maybe move the body for a bit.
All right. Thanks a lot, Mia. So if you're able to get up, please join us as we do some movement. If you can't get up, then you can stay sitting. We're just going to take a couple of deep breaths into the body. Exhaling with a loud sigh. Maybe you were working before. Maybe you're just waking up, depending on your time zone. Taking a good cleansing breath and letting go. And then we're just going to do some tapping, starting with the arms. You can do the inside of the arms, the outside of the arms, going to the shoulders, the chest, down to the solar plexus, tapping the belly, also tapping the lower back. You can do fingers, you can do like drumming on the lower back if you like. We're waking up the body. We're increasing circulation, also even helping our immune system. This is really great to do first thing in the morning. And just pausing for one moment. As you feel the effects of the tapping, closing your eyes and just taking a couple more breaths into the body. You may notice some vibration, some tingling. Just coming to the present moment as we continue with our beautiful presentation today. Thank you so much for participating. Handing it back over to you, Neil.
Excellent. So thank you so much for that, Mandy. I definitely feel a lot more engaged afterwards. And interesting what you were saying about the immune system there. We're certainly going to mention some of the effects of burnout on that. So what is burnout? Well, it's a real chronic state of physical, emotional, and mental exhaustion that can often make us feel extremely depersonalized, and it certainly has a huge impact on our performance. It's often caused by periods of prolonged stress, and these are often work related, where you've got persistent high demands and low control over our workload. But it can also be exacerbated by increase in things like emotional labor, lack of agency within our role, and often having a misalignment between our values and motivation for a particular work. But also things like social isolation and unsupported environments can add into causes of burnout. All of this comes on top of internal factors, of course, and we do have particular risk factors within ourselves in terms of our genes, in terms of our resilience, that might make us more susceptible to things like burnout. So how do we know if it's happening to us? I mean, the symptoms of burnout can feel like the symptoms of many other things, but what we see is that they progressively get worse. And within our mind, those are things like detachment and cynicism. We often have a lot of difficulty concentrating. We lose creativity and motivation. We often don't want to socialize and engage in hobbies that we usually enjoy. There's a level of emotional numbness that comes about, and also very much so cognitive impairment. When we look at what happens within the body, that can look like things like similar to chronic fatigue. We often get a lot of problems with insomnia, people getting headaches and muscle tension, but that starts to escalate and become problems in the body like immune suppression, gastrointestinal disturbances, and dysregulation of our cortisol system. Now, cortisol is, if we move to the next slide, our primary stress response mechanism, and it occurs by being released after activation of the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, the HPA axis, which connects our brain and our adrenal glands, and it really coordinates the stress hormone response based on things like mood, energy, time of day, and threat level. Now, it's a very delicate system that feeds back to itself. And when we have burnout, essentially we have overactivation of this system that starts to break it down and break down some of the feedback loops. So in burnout, we see dysregulation of this HPA axis, altering cortisol release, up until the point where we actually see cortisol levels flatline and people become completely unable to even get out of bed. That then results in people getting, once we have that dysregulation in cortisol, we get chronic inflammation, we get problems with neuroinflammation, so inflammation in our brain. This can then lead to exacerbating things like prefrontal cortex hypoactivity, so the part of the front of our brain which is involved with a lot of our emotional processing and rational thinking is actually seen to get thinner in people with burnout. And areas of our brain like the amygdala, which is our fear response region in the brain, have hyperactivity and an increased perception of threat, even if it's to salient triggers. Now, all of this means we get dysregulation in our autonomic system, and our autonomic system is our fight and flight system, our parasympathetic and sympathetic nervous system. And these become very dysregulated until, as I say, we become unable to even get out of bed at some point. I hope this shows to you that burnout is not just about stress. It's not just an acute feeling in a moment. It's a chronic disorder that affects not just the brain, but the whole body and our endocrine system. Now, moving on to the next slide, there are a number of different types of burnout, and there can be different parts within a single type of burnout, and they can be brought about by things like just having too much work, but also having things, like I said, of lack of agency, or not feeling like you're being challenged enough, or potentially not having enough creative outputs, or feeling like we can properly engage with our creative sides. Now, there are risks as well for certain people, like women, for instance, of certain times when they are more likely to experience burnout. We know that for women, for instance, hormonal fluctuations throughout our lives, which are themselves actually orchestrated by the HPA axis, can result in changes in the way that our body responds to stress. So at certain times, we may get more of a stress response. But we also know that these low levels of estrogen that come around primarily through perimenopause and menopause, they actually lead to dysregulation in dopamine, reduction in our serotonergic action, and weakening in our stress resilience. Now, this all increases the vulnerability to burnout and vulnerability to HPA axis dysfunctioning. And prolonged levels of burnout in women can actually affect things like our thyroid and prolactin, which can cause more health problems further down the line. So, how could psychedelics help with this? I think we've come to the point in psychedelic science where we can be pretty sure that these substances work. There is an increasingly large body of evidence from clinical trials that show that psychedelics like psilocybin are extremely effective at treating things like PTSD, depression, anxiety. Now, they do that through a number of mechanisms, and some of those mechanisms really overlap with the mechanisms of how burnout is developed. Now, we're not just, in order to think about those mechanisms, we're not just talking about the activation we see within the serotonergic system, which of course is amazing for allowing this reset of maladaptive brain connectivity, but we see from psychedelics that we reduce amygdala reactivity, so the amount that our amygdala is reacting to things. We actually increase connectivity in areas like the prefrontal cortex. We are able to disrupt things like the default mode network, which is this central part of the brain that can be associated with our ego, but it also doesn't allow areas like the prefrontal cortex to allow rational thought into our reactive thinking. But we also see that psychedelics help to regulate things like the HPA axis. So we're seeing them really helping to change how we respond to stress. Finally, after we've taken a psychedelic, we see this huge increase in things like neurogenesis and neuroplasticity, which can allow our brains to essentially adapt and be able to create new ways of thinking. Now, that's psychedelics for you, but we're here to talk about psychedelic retreats. And I always really love the phrase, you can't read the label while you're sitting in the jar. And I think when we think about retreats, we have this incredible opportunity to not just go away on holiday and step away from our lives in that way, but to actually step into a safe container via which we are able to then go through the psychedelic process. And a lot of the psychological components of psychedelic use really require us to be in supportive, safe environments like the one that Beckley Retreats holds. And in those environments is where we're able to make that really meaningful change and take those really reflective views on our lives, as well as get all the amazing benefits that we know from the mechanisms of psychedelics within the brain. Thank you so much. I'll pass back over to you now, Neil.
Thank you, Grace. And I'll just kind of add on to what Grace said, but from a more personal lens. As I said earlier, I was in the service. I was in the Ranger Regiment, which is a small special mission unit. And I went to Iraq once and Afghanistan twice. And you're in this constant state of readiness. And, I was experiencing burnout. And the symptoms that I had was sleeplessness. And this idea of tired and wired, I don't know if that resonates with anyone, where you feel anxious, but you can't really rest. And that's because you're kind of stuck in this fight or flight mode. And that was quite chronic for me for years. And what I've realized now is that, as Grace said, from a scientific perspective, is that when you're in that fight or flight mode, the body is just prioritizing other things. It's prioritizing safety. And some of these kind of higher level functions of being human, like empathy, creativity, they're just not priority if your body is literally worried about staying safe. And so how that then manifested in my life at that point was it really put a strain on my relationships. When you're not feeling empathy, you're not able to connect with people at that, real human level. And then it becomes like very isolating. And I think that's such a chronic problem that we see in soldiers, is that they feel alone, even if they have a lot of people around them. And so then I got out of the service and I learned meditation. I had some exposure to these plants in a controlled setting, and I learned a very different way to live and take care of myself. And it didn't happen overnight, but I did make some progress over a few years. But then I went into the corporate world, and I was at McKinsey and Company, and then I was in private equity doing restructurings. And at the end of that period of my kind of corporate career, I realized that I had similar symptoms coming back that I had worked so hard to get rid of from the military. And what was wild was I was looking around at a lot of my peers, and many of them were doing very well professionally, but they were having similar symptoms. Then they'd never been to war, but they were having trouble in their relationships. They weren't feeling fulfilled. They were using uppers in the morning and downers in the evening, and they were in these cycles of just not feeling good. And the other thing that I think I realized in that environment too was how much this idea of kind of alignment with work matters. And now, if I'm honest with myself, that just wasn't my work. I shouldn't have been working there. And your body knows these things, whether your conscious mind is thinking about it all the time, but your body's trying to give you signals if you're kind of living in a way that is not in alignment with who you really are. And some of the research that we have around this that I think is so fascinating is if you talk to doctors and healthcare professionals who experience extreme levels of burnout, it's not the long hours. It's not the long hours that's really driving it. It's that they're so frustrated with the system. So the environment in some ways is creating the burnout, right? Or it's exacerbating the burnout. So I just, ask the folks that have joined this call today to reflect on that. And, is the environment that you're in allowing you to kind of live to your fullest and healthiest? And if not, maybe there's some need to make some change. And you can go on to the next slide. And so at Beckley Retreats, we are part of this kind of broader Beckley ecosystem of companies that really starts with the Beckley Foundation, which was started by Amanda Fielding, who unfortunately passed this year, but she passed at 82, surrounded by family and friends, and lived an extraordinary life. And the Beckley Foundation was one of the world's leading research nonprofits, or is one of the world's leading research nonprofits for psychedelics and integrative health. And we developed this program, this integrative health program, over the last few years with some of the world's leading experts to help people deal with things like burnout and actually make real change and build new habits. And all of our programs have a similar structure, and they're around these kind of core immersive experiences or a retreat, where you actually get an opportunity to do a bit of a digital detox, take a break from the normal madness of life, and practice some of these things in person. But before we bring people down, we do roughly a month-long digital preparation. You can do that from anywhere in the world. It's mostly self-directed, but we're really big on habit formation because that's where you're going to learn the skills to be able to maintain the benefits. So we're teaching meditation, mindful movement, breath work. We're getting the group together a couple times so that we can create that healthy group dynamic. And then, when people arrive on site, we can kind of get right to it, if you will. And then during the immersive portion, we're doing all those practices that we taught in the prep, but now we're doing them together in a beautiful location that's away from everything and close to nature. And then we'd also do 2 psilocybin sessions in a controlled format. And, for many people, 88% of our guests say that, those experiences are the most meaningful of their life, one of the most or the most meaningful experiences of their life. So it's very significant. And then on the back end of the immersive portion, we do roughly 6 weeks of digital integration. Don't let the 6 weeks scare you. Again, it's self-directed. You can do it from anywhere, but it's continued access to our catalog of content and practical exercises. And because what we see is that after these experiences with psychedelics, there's this window of neuroplasticity. So there's this increased potentiality for change, which is great, but you do need to do something with it. If you don't do anything, the likelihood is you're going to revert back to the way you were. There's a lot of momentum in us by the time we're young adults. But that is why we take our guests through a structured approach to help them learn some of these core practices so that they can maintain that benefit. And then after the core program is complete, we have more and more ways for people to stay in touch and build community and frankly, just find other friend groups that maybe are more conducive to moving in this direction of better health. And I will pass it to Mandy. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Neil. So I'm going to say a bit about safety and suitability. We actually have a three-tier program that ensures safety and suitability before the participant even arrives at the retreat. So before participants attends, we have a screening procedure where each applicant will fill a private health questionnaire and does a one-on-one review with our screening team. And during this screening, we consider things like medication, physical and mental health history. We pay special attention to certain medications to ensure that there are no contraindications. We also check to see if the applicant is comfortable in small group settings and has some sort of a support system in place back home. So that happens before the participant gets to the retreat. And then actually on the retreat, we have different safety protocols. And at the retreats are all held in a legal setting. This is not an underground operation at all. We operate in countries where psychedelics are legal. And so this is important to be able to have the proper medical access in place. We always have a doctor on call and a nurse is present at every single retreat. We have small cohorts and adequate facilitator support. We have about a 1-to-3, we have a 1-to-3 facilitator to participant ratio so that the participants can feel very supported. We also have very experienced facilitators who are trauma informed. We pay a lot of attention to things like consent, boundaries, and privacy. And then after the retreat is over, we have a structured integration program, as Neil mentioned before. And in this program, we are able to offer integration circles where participants can maintain connection with each other as they re-enter into regular life. We also offer one-on-one coaching options for anyone who feels the need for more attention. So we cover all bases when it comes to safety and suitability. I'm going to pass it back over to Neil because I think we may have some questions. So we want to also save some time for some question and answers. Thank you.
Thank you, Mandy. Yes, let me check the chat here. And if you guys care to, feel free to drop some questions in the chat. Let me just scan through here. Some previous guests. Great. Thank you for joining. Okay, let's hear come some. Is it usual for burnout to become depression and anxiety? Is the brain affected in the same way? That sounds like a Grace question.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we definitely see a huge amount of overlap between depression and anxiety. And I think it's really important that we understand that psychedelics have slightly rewritten the psychiatric rule book. And there are what we call depression and anxiety often have a huge overlap in their symptomology. Now, when we think about things like depression, we definitely see that in burnout, where we see people with really low motivation and low dopamine as a result of this dysfunction within their cortisol system. And we certainly see people with anxiety. As I said, we get this hyperactivation of the amygdala to salient triggers. So what I mean by that is your body is acting like it's receiving a threat from things that are not threatening. Those are the exact mechanisms that we see with anxiety and depression. And I think that a lot of people who have burnout, if they were to go to their physician, would probably receive a diagnosis of anxiety and depression, at which point they would put you on antidepressant and anti-anxiety medication, which we know just masks the symptoms. It doesn't treat these underlying changes in our brain chemistry and functioning, whereas we do know that psychedelics change this fundamental functioning and chemistry in our brain, which is the same that we see in depression and anxiety.
Thank you, Grace. Could you please share more about the psilocybin ceremonies? How many are there? Why? How long do they last? Mandy, do you want to take that one?
Sure. So we have two psilocybin ceremonies, and they last anywhere from about 4 to 5 hours. Um, and it's a really great structure where we have a ceremony, then integration, then ceremony, then integration. So it's like an inhale, exhale, and rest. Inhale, exhale, and rest. And yeah, so this is the structure that we have. Is there more to this question about how many cell and why? Okay, so scientifically, it's proven that for long-term life changes, doing two psilocybin ceremonies in a retreat is definitely more beneficial than doing just one.
Great. Yeah, and I'll say I think one thing that Beckley does really well, you can have these experiences in a doctor's office, and that's great, in a more sanitized environment. And frankly, for some people, that's probably more appropriate. If you're very have a lot of resistance to being in groups, or you have your kind of state of being is needs even more support, then that might be more appropriate. Our sessions are done in groups, but we really believe that there's something quite special that's happening amongst the members of the group. And I think that Beckley does that incredibly well. And so everyone's in the same space and having their own individual experience, but there's also something that is happening at the group level that's actually quite fascinating to see and participate in. And we're also trying to find this balance between having very high levels of professionalism and safety standards, but also not over clinicalizing it. We think that the intentionality, the artistry, the beauty, the music is actually an important part of the experience. And so it's almost like art. It's really a beautiful way to have these experiences. And in Jamaica, it's so beautiful, the kind of depth of the cultural immersive experience. It's Jamaican facilitators, it's Jamaican land. We talk about Jamaican spiritual traditions, and yeah, it's really a thing of beauty. And that's great. And I think, look, we're 2 minutes before the break, and I think it's always nice to go ahead, Grace.
Yeah, I spotted one or two small things in the chat I want to reply to. First of all,
Okay,
to
sure.
the person who said that they recently retired from the VA. If you are interested in these medicines, then please check out Heroic Hearts. I just say we often run collaborative retreats with Beckley. But somebody was just speaking a little about having had burnout several times and seeing if this would help. And I think, all the mechanistic reasons I just said to you are very, very true of why this helps with burnout. But I think something else happens when we start using psychedelic medicines, and it allows us to really reconnect with things like our values so much more. And also get that mind-body connection back. And, although we're not saying that psychedelics could prevent you getting burnout in the future, it certainly allows you to see the warning signs a lot sooner when you're engaging with things that don't align with your values, or you're starting to notice stuff go wrong in your body that perhaps you were just too numb to before. So I think there's a real opportunity of doing these things and them allowing you to see the burnout coming much faster than without psychedelic use. So just wanted to answer those two quick ones.
Thank you, Grace. And there's also another question in there about Jamaica. Jamaica just experienced a Category 5 storm, and it was catastrophic for a lot of the island, and it's going to take a long time to recover. We, as a team, were fortunate that no one on our team was injured, and the property that we used experienced a little bit of damage to the foliage and surrounding areas, but the buildings are fine, and we're actually running programs again starting on the 30th. And our teams are so thankful to be back to work. And frankly, visiting Jamaica is probably one of the best things that any of us can do on an individual basis, because we got to get the economy going back. So yeah, thank you for asking and supporting Jamaica however you can. Yes, it's safe to travel there. Yes, we wouldn't be doing programs if we didn't think it was safe. All right, we should end on time so that we don't make everyone late for their next session. Thank you so much. We'll do more of these. We're here. If you guys want to reach out, we're very willing to get on the phone and answer any questions. We want to be as helpful as we can. So thank you so much for joining today.
Thank you so much.
Nice job, Grace. Thank you, Mandy.